welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's this week in cricket time again. We're going to talk some red ball, India, England. A record win for India. Is Bazball on the rocks? We'll talk a little bit about Sarfaraz, Dhruv Jurel's debuts, Duckett's 100 and the inevitable media reaction to what is just one game of Test cricket. We'll also talk a little bit of New Zealand, South Africa, and we'll also maybe just give a little bit of a tip to the New Zealand-Australia T20 series that started last night here in New Zealand. We'll also talk a little bit of Australia versus South Africa women as well. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, we're here again recording this week in cricket. The India-England series continues. We're recording this on Thursday night. Thursday night here in New Zealand. The fourth test starts tomorrow afternoon. So coming around thick and fast. We've got, I guess, a little bit of news on pitch and conditions and teams and all that kind of stuff. But look, let's firstly talk about the game that happened last week in Rajkot. Where do we want to start? Lippy, you're probably my go-to man for the narrative here from the cricketing world and the cricketing gods.
Well, I guess for me, the things that stood out were that it's a record-breaking week. I mean, we had India broke a record. We had Jaiswal, who's broken a record for sixes in a series and sixes for his innings. Kane Williamson's broken records. Will O'Rourke broken records. You've broken your hand. It's all kind of happening this week. But I mean, look, I guess for me, the thing that I want to start with is probably just that Jaiswal. I mean, he's the one that, it's a weird sort of thing because when I look at this game, you go back and you see the scorecards and you go, Ravi Jadeja got 100 and he got 5 for, but it almost just felt like another day at the office for him, which maybe kind of says, talks to his brilliance. But Jaiswal, we talked about him last week. Obviously, he scored a double 100, but he just keeps looking better and better. And the way he's able to kind of go through the gears and almost sort of come back through the gears again during his innings. I mean, I feel like the way he did that, it just set up the game. And chasing 500 is going to be pretty tough in India, isn't it?
It seems like the Test series is hinging on whoever gets a double 100 wins the game.
Or close to.
Or within 4 runs
yes.
thereof. Another incredible innings for Jaiswal. He's setting all sorts of records. I mean, statistically, 3 double hundreds now. I think he's got, how old is he now? 22, 23. So he's not very old, and he's starting to set records that are, only Vinod Kambli, I think, has a similar number of double hundreds at same age for India and a whole bunch of other really meaningful but obscure kind of records like that. And he's a tremendous talent.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the sixes as well. He equalled friend of the show, Wasim Akram's record for, most sixes in an innings. I was stunned that he's already broken the record for most sixes in a series. I think he's got 22 or something now. And yeah, that's
2 tests still to go.
2 tests still to go. He could absolutely annihilate that record.
India have set a record for most sixes in a series by a team with 2 to go. So there's all sorts of maximums being set. DLF will be laughing all the way to the bank, I think.
But I think the thing though, that tempo thing, I think is so huge for someone like him, and we see it with some other. With some of the players coming through now. So Jaiswal, you look at him and he actually kind of started quite slow in that double 100 innings. He got off to a really reasonably steady start. And I think, look, the test for him is going to come when he goes. He's made an incredible start to his career. This test that I'm about to say, I think he'll actually still thrive. But, he's going to go to Australia and England and all these other conditions, New Zealand, and it'll be different for him. But the way he's able to kind of get into his innings, then kind of he attacked Jimmy Anderson. He smashed him for 3 sixes in a row, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just, annihilated him for that over. Then he sort of is able to almost dial it back and go, okay, well, I don't need to keep going. Mm-hmm. I've got this situation and I can press on and get really big scores, which are the game-changing scores.
You talk about it, Binksy, and when we play on Saturdays about riding the roller coaster and knowing when to really go for it and when to sort of back off a little bit. I think he is, even at 22, 23, he's got a really, really good understanding of his own game and how he rides that roller coaster. And he does it as well as anyone in world cricket at the moment.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think there was a whole lot of horse shit talked about this from the England guys. I think there was a comment around, Jaiswal's learnt from us. I'm just like, absolute poppycock. We should be learning from the way that he's played in the innings that he's had in this series. Yeah, absolutely knowing the game situation. You talk a little bit about the way he was, I wouldn't necessarily say circumspect at the start of that innings, India's second innings, but, got into his work. And I think the only way India were going to lose the game from there was if they did have an absolute shambles of a collapse, and then in England were able to chase down something around about 300 or something like that, which would have been obviously 180 odd more than they ended up getting anyway. But yeah, just the way that he went about that second innings, and I think the sort of topsy-turvy nature of the game really. India scored at under 3.5 in their first innings. Yeah. You'd probably have said that they were a little bit under. Scoring 445 in that first dig. England then obviously went out, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, 200 for one or whatever it was, and then imploded from there, but went at nearly 4.5 and over. And then India in the third innings of the game, okay, they've got a really, really good platform, and Jaiswal and Shubman Gill and Kuldeep Yadav and Sarfaraz Khan were able to go out and express themselves. But yes, they did that on a pitch that was deteriorating by that point. But I think they'd obviously got a lot of overs into the England bowlers' legs already. They batted 130 overs in that first innings, and then England, and look, this is going to be, I wouldn't want to be James Anderson, because Stokes is trying to kill him, isn't he? Like, go out there and bowl whatever it was, 25 overs in 35 degree heat, Mark Wood 27 overs in 35 degree heat, and then give them less than sort of 72 overs off before they're asking them to lace up the bowling boots and go again. And that probably also feeds in a little bit to Joe Root. He's been asked to bowl an awful lot of overs as well, and that can't be helping a guy that's
runs, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, who's got to obviously got to be batting at 4 in that. But look, I think you've just got to give immense credit to the Indian team throughout the course of this game. I think obviously that Jaiswal double 100 is what we're all going to talk about. But I've got to admit, I think that the game was obviously set up by Rohit and Ravi Jadeja, and Sarfaraz as well on debut looked really, really good for his 60 odd in both innings, and even Jurel, who came in and was unlucky, to nick off, fall short of a 50 on debut, but I thought he looked good with a bat. Certainly better than Bharat's looked with a bat, and looked pretty reasonable with the gloves as well throughout the course of the
Got
test
a good
match.
first-class record, Jurel. I mean, it's small, it's not small sample size, but it's a good first-class record. Can I just pick up on a point that you made in terms of the Jaiswal being able to go up and down the gears, and you made a reference to Joe Root, I think. What have we learned so far 2-1 in this series? I think what we've learned is that England can learn a lesson from India in terms of Bazball doesn't necessarily mean you need to be in top gear all the time. And from ball one, I think there is a happy medium where England, particularly Joe Root, who's looked like a cat on a hot tin roof for much of this series with the bat, could maybe just absorb the first 20 or 30 balls of his innings, and then once he's comfortable, try and accelerate the pace, or even just have guys bat around him who do all of that, and he can still score. I mean, we've talked about it. He can still score at 70 without taking a tremendous amount of risk. So I'm not suggesting that, India are getting it right all the time and England are getting it wrong. But I think for Joe Root in particular, if there's a guy to be looking at in this series of going on, who's getting it right at the moment? And I think it's obviously Jaiswal, but I think it's for that reason that he can go up and down the gears that I would be looking at that going, okay, well, maybe there's an adjustment that I can make.
Yeah, look, it's going to sound really weird, but I'm not super worried about Joe Root. I think I probably don't necessarily think he's looked like a cat on a hot tin roof. I think what he's done is found ways to get out that you wouldn't associate with his normal way of playing. And look, we can debate this until the cows come home. That little reverse lap or whatever we want to call it has worked pretty well for him. Now, essentially, he got caught at second slip in that innings. I know the point I want to make is if he'd have got caught at second slip to Siraj or to Bumrah, with the ball on a sort of fifth stump channel, going to play his trademark little back foot punch, I don't think we'd be talking about it. It is the the fact that he's played that shot. And I think the reality is that whether we like it or not, as particularly as an England fan, whether we like it or not, the guys are going to play these shots, and sometimes they're going to look a little bit ropey getting out. So I don't necessarily have a massive worry about Root. I still think he's a class player. I'd still, if I had a TAB account, I'd be getting some money on him getting 100 in one of the 4 innings that's left to come in this series, because form is temporary and class is permanent, as they've often said. And I am not super worried. I just hope that he's the one that is deciding to play in the manner that he's playing, rather than it being, hey, you need to go out and do this to impose yourself. And I absolutely think it is him that's gone out and tried to play in this way, because when I look at the other guy in the side that has tried to impose this mentality on the team the most has been Ben Stokes, probably, with the exception of, the guys at the top of the order who've been brought in to do a specific job. But we've seen Stokes over the course of the, whatever it is, 21 or 22 test matches that he's been in charge now, soak up a lot of pressure and then know when to go. Exactly. So I'd just like to see that Joe Root has a little bit of a think about that.
I feel like it's the sort of unspoken thing about Bazball that actually Ben Stokes, who's obviously one of the main
shit out of it.
He's the one in all of these, for the past 20 tests, he gets a start. He gets himself in, and then he goes, and he's someone who catches up.
And that's perfectly fine, because really they all can. And I think that's the lesson for Joe Root. Look, the three of us are telling a guy who's got 11,000 test runs how to bat, but I mean,
that was Ben Stokes' comment, wasn't it?
That is the lesson. It's a fascinating conversation, though, isn't it? Because we've the whole time during this Bazball era, we've been talking about them finding a balance, and where are they going to find this balance? And they've won they haven't lost a series so far during this span. They've won 14 out of 21 tests, I think it is. Yeah. They've found a pretty good balance. They've turned things around. And I'm interested to get your view, Binksy, really on all of the backlash that has come, because yes, it is just one test, but obviously it was the example that probably we haven't really had so far in Bazball of everything going wrong, because you mentioned it before, India were 33 for 3. They built Rohit, Jadeja dug them out of a huge hole, got them into a situation where they were probably disappointed at 434 or whatever it was in that first innings, because they'd done so well to get out of it. England is then 207 for 2 with a incredible innings from Ben Duckett.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of the test, it kind of just all goes wrong, and everyone is just jumping on England.
Yeah, it can all go wrong. If you take risks, sometimes you're a rooster, sometimes you're a feather duster, sometimes you're the bug, sometimes you're the windscreen. But in this particular instance, I think India have shown what calculated risk-taking looks like and how it can be successful and go big in a big innings. Pope did a great job in the first test. I think the lesson is that there are guys who are more naturally disposed, i.e. Duckett, Crawley, to go about that in that way. Root has 11,000 test runs, 10,500 of them have come doing it one way, and he's trying something a little bit different. And I think there is an avenue back to maybe somewhere in between. And I think that's the point that I think we're all going to land on eventually. If we sort of calm down, nothing's as good or as bad as it seems. We come down into maybe if Root's just a fraction less aggressive, takes 30 balls to get in and then plays that shot, everyone's fine with it. But there will always be critics for Bazball. There'll always be people who are on the other side of the fence that this is brilliant and how good is it? I think the proof is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and Lippy, your question is probably around some of the backlash and the media piece. And
to be fair, I think that's actually that happened in the day or two after, and now it seems to be turning around to, England's now going to approach, maintain this positive approach, but what do they do next?
Yeah, but I think I kind of wanted to prove a point by going and doing this, and for the first time probably ever it has. I'm looking at my test match special podcast feed, and when we kind of look at where we were at is, it really is that, fish and chip paper conversation. Missed chances cost England. That's day one. Day two, swashbuckling Duckett leads England fight back. And then, day after that, the worst day of England's new era. So I think it just is these extreme highs and lows. And I think there's a little bit of a, perpetuation, if that's a word, in the media that is making this, that, to quote, the great philosopher Rajiv Reddy, what is it?
Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. Exactly.
And that's the case, I really think, with cricket, with sport, with this England team. And I think let's not forget, leading into this series, India have lost something like, I'll get the stat wrong, but 4 games out of 50 or something like that in India in the last 10, 15 years.
And England are 2 of them.
And England are 2 of them. And England are the only team to have, recently won a series over there, but going back to 2012, I think, or something like that. So I do think there is, a little bit of an overreaction to this. We have got an absolute shellacking in this game. We won't be the last team to go and get a shellacking. And I think what is disappointing is that England did have a chance to get into that game. The first day, I kind of turned it on when I got home from work at 3 for 33, and I thought, hold on, game on here. Yeah. Naturally, India got themselves back in the game, and then for England to go from 2 for 180 odd to essentially 300 and whatever it was, 19 all out, that was really, really disappointing.
7 for 91 they lost, effectively.
And the bigger worry for me from an England perspective is Jonny Bairstow. Yeah. So, realistically, and he's been in this position a hell of a lot over the course of his Test match career, been written off, and he's done. He was one of the big architects of the way that this team wanted to go and play their cricket. That golden summer when we played, the one-off test against India, South Africa.
Yeah, all those chases.
All those chases in the same summer. He was fantastic, but he's probably got 2 Test matches here, because you would expect Harry Brook, who's going to come back into the equation when he's able to. Zach Crawley, Ben Duckett have again probably are going to come out of this series with certainly in the...
they're rusted on. They've
been excellent.
Yeah, in the credit, and obviously Ollie Pope as well. So, and I think Bairstow's playing for that batting spot, and particularly if Stokes gets himself back bowling, it probably means they don't need to think too much about bolstering that side from a batting perspective when they've got a guy like Ben Stokes who can balance the side at 6. So that's really where my worry is. And then just looking at the pitch for this second test, it looks like this one could be one where the toss is super important. But we've said that about the first 3 games, and actually the pitches have been really good.
They've rewarded excellent play, and that's what we've seen. I mean, before we kind of look ahead to that test, there are a few players we probably should hit on England. I mean, Duckett, do you want to talk a little bit about Duckett's innings? I mean, the way he was able to take down 3 of the world's best spinners in their conditions, it was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, look, I'll let Baldy jump in. I don't want to say too much about this. We were talking about this at cricket on Saturday, and someone said, I saw the highlights. And I said, well, seeing the highlights of his innings probably didn't do it justice, because the highlights actually just show you all of the shots. What they didn't show you is that literally those shots came in a highlights package. Yeah, there was literally not a ball that he didn't try and hit for 4. And save playing and missing maybe half a dozen times early on, after he'd got through that initial little onslaught from Bumrah and Siraj, he absolutely toyed with the Indian bowlers.
Yeah, talk to us about that, because that was one of the things that we talked about quite a bit on Saturday, because we spent a lot of time either in the sheds or out in the field. I did. You didn't.
I was going to say I did.
You didn't. I did. Yeah. Talk to me about how he manipulated the field in that innings, because it was one of the highlights, and it's probably underrated when you just go back and watch all of the 23 fours and 2 maximums.
Yeah, well, look, I think what it showed is, he's really, really worked on his game. I think, you would have said he's not great down the ground, he's not great through the covers, but, he's actually got a way to now hit the ball through extra cover. So, guys can't just go, well, we'll hide the ball from his sweep out wide and make him hit the ball through the covers. He's got every single angle with those sweeps, from the, really, really hard hit reverse that goes square. But, there was an over where he literally did what looked like a benefit game trick to me. He hit the ball square, then moved the man. He hit the ball to mid-wicket, then moved the man. He hit the ball, then reversed it square, then drove on through the covers when they overpitched. Just the way that he manipulated the field. And then, did the thing that you always want to do, which is when you then get a really good ball, you've manipulated the field so much that you're then knocking it into the gap. And, him and Crawley run pretty well between the wickets as well. So turns the odd one into a two, but certainly keeps ticking that strike over. And look, England got shellacked in this game, but I certainly think from a bowling perspective, one of the things you wouldn't probably want to do too often is bowl at a guy that's 6'5" who wants to hit you down the ground, and then bowl the next ball at a guy who's 5'6" and basically hits the ball wherever he wants between sort of mid-wicket and cover, because he's got that that ability with his his sweeps and whatnot. So yeah, look, a really, really good innings, and I think proving that going back to county cricket for 4 or 5 years, which is what he's had to do. He had a torrid time in India in 2016 and Bangladesh prior to that. He was on toast for Ravichandran Ashwin in that series. He's really bounced back well, and he's one of the guys that's coming out of this England team with a bit of credit from this series so far.
Absolutely. I mean, the way he took down Kuldeep in that, on the day 2, to give Kuldeep credit, on day 3 he bounced back super well.
He did bowl really well.
Probably the worst ball that he bowled was the one that got the wicket of Duckett, but he really
that happens when you're a wrist spinner, mate.
Exactly,
that happens.
Exactly. But yeah, the way he was able to do that to the spinners was fantastic. How about some of the Indians that really performed? Because Sarfaraz, we mentioned him before. I mean, you look at when you don't know, we don't watch the Ranji Trophy, we don't see all of this stuff. When a newish player to you comes into the game and you go, okay, cool, I'll have a look at their first class stats, and you see that he averages 70 from 46 matches, and you're kind of going, okay, so what on earth is going on here? And then actually, like when he batted, I'd say maybe until he got the first run, because it looked like he was super nervous to get that first run. After that, I mean, he looked very, very comfortable.
Looked pretty comfy, didn't he? Yeah, he's got an excellent first-class record, Sarfaraz Khan, and you look at the average and you go, he's probably only played half a dozen games, maybe a dozen games. He's got 3,500, almost 4,000 runs at an average of 70 over 46 matches, as you say. So the sample size is big enough. It looks every inch the Test cricketer India have uncovered, not surprisingly. Yet another Test cricketer capable of batting in that middle order. It's getting more and more congested by the day. Were it not for the fact that he was absolutely barbecued, like he was slow roasted, turned, marinated, basted, had a bit of a barbecue rub there and finished with some
went in the warming draw for a bit,
exactly,
and then back on for a final finishing.
Exactly, he was absolutely served up on a platter by Ravindra Jadeja. Unfortunate for him on debut. I reckon he could have gone and got a big 100. He looked like he was ready to roll.
Yeah, look, England didn't have any answers to him really over the course of the two. And yeah, as you say, they're going to have been able to see plenty of footage of him. Because there's certainly a pretty decent strike rate out there, and 1400s to go and look on the Ranji Trophy highlights page. His stories are really fascinating one as well. I think family moved up to Mumbai, so he could play lots and lots of cricket. I think there was an interview with his dad during the Test match where they said
a ripper.
Yeah, it seems an absolute ripper, and he said he played something like 2,000 or 3,000 games of cricket.
Wow.
Sort of since he's moved to Mumbai, literally playing in every single pickup game that he could, which I wouldn't want to play against him.
I wouldn't, but he's a good cricketer.
But a serious question, because we keep talking about this Indian strength in depth, and all the batters that can come into this team, particularly bowlers as well, obviously with the spin stocks that they've got. But we've said, and we'll probably come on and talk a little bit about Shubman Gill, who obviously got a score in this game. He's probably got himself a little bit more time now.
Yeah.
But we've had Patidar come in. We've had obviously now Sarfaraz come in. We've got some questions probably about 2 or 3 guys. Rahul out the side. Kohli's going to miss the rest of the series as well.
Yeah.
So, whilst the names that we talk about, there seems to be so much pressure on these guys when they come in to do well. Is that because there's so much other talent that if you don't get a score that you might spend a lot of time out of the side? Right. And is that a problem for India?
I don't think it's a problem, but ask Mayank Agarwal what it's like to get back into the Indian side, because he was the next big thing before Gill was the next big thing. Prithvi Shaw was the next big thing. So there are lots of guys on the outer now that are forced to make another 4,000, 5,000 runs in Ranji Trophy. It feels a lot like the Australian first-class scene of the mid-90s, where you've got lots of guys having to make runs season after season after season to get back into the Indian side. So that, to me, that's the indicator of how deep this Indian team is how hard it is and how many runs you have to make at first-class level to get back into the team. So I think that's the big key indicator for me at the moment. On Patidar, I haven't seen a lot from him. I haven't seen anything that shows me that he's got the likes to be able to hang with, Shreyas Iyer or Agarwal or Shaw or any of those.
I think if Rahul was fit for this fourth test,
absolutely,
Patidar would be the one you'd miss.
He would miss out. Yeah.
Well, and 2 poor dismissals for him as well. Like poked one into the covers in the first innings and slapped a long hop. Okay, that happens now and again, but it just didn't look great when he had a chance to go out there, get himself in, and then really, probably have almost like a no pressure knock at that point. Comes into bat at 2 for 200 or something like that. That'd be a brilliant time to bat as a debutant, wouldn't it? Second innings, set up a little declaration. You bat for yourself with Jaiswal at the other end going great guns. So
that would have kept him in the conversation, I think, in front of the selectors if he had got a 60 or 70 red ink in the second innings, like Sarfaraz did. Right, that's where we're at the moment. We're talking about Sarfaraz being the guy who will stick around when other players start to come back, and unfortunately, Patidar is going to have to go back to Ranji Trophy, going to have to go back to IPL and make a lot of runs to get himself, I think, back in front of the selectors again.
Yeah, I think the depth thing will be interesting. This test, and when we look ahead to this next test that's about to happen.
Can I just ask one question before we move on to the preview of this test? So there was an interesting scenario in this, and maybe this is one that we'll come on to in a future of cricket style episode. But Ravichandran Ashwin leaving the ground, I think on day 2. Personal reason. I think his mother was ill, I believe. It turned out that he came back, but there was a little bit of chat around, really at this stage, only allowed substitutes for COVID or concussion, so that COCO is the abbreviation that the ICC should use if they don't. But on a serious note, do we think there is a conversation around substitutes in Test cricket for these type of reasons or tactical reasons as well?
I don't think so for I would not like to see tactical subs. Let's just put that to bed, I think, if you ask me.
I think I'm with Stuart here in Test cricket, and I wouldn't like to see a tactical substitution, but I think it's reasonable if a player is experiencing off-field stuff, whether it's mental health or family, etc., in the same way that we can take a day off and leave our jobs and go and deal with those things. I think Test cricketers absolutely should be able to. I'm not sure whether they should be able to come back into the game. I'd be happy for them to be replaced with a like-for-like player. So Akshar comes in, for example, for the sake of the argument, for a Jadeja, for example. But I'm not sure that I would advocate for Ravichandran Ashwin to miss 2 days, another player comes in, and then Ravichandran Ashwin comes back and plays day 5, for example. That would be an unusual scenario. But I'm certain that there's avenues that we can explore where players could be substituted for mental health or family reasons or anything I think other than probably injury.
Yeah.
But I still think injury is bad luck, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I guess, look, so we're all going to agree, which is bizarre. We needed Raj here to break that cycle potentially. But no, yeah, absolutely agree. I certainly think for those kind of reasons that there should be a discretion rule in there somewhere.
That's the hard thing, isn't it? Because they can't really make a rule. Like every situation is going to be different, and I think it almost has to be with the match referee.
I agree. Yeah,
match referee has to go, well, I've looked at this situation and I feel like this is appropriate that they can get a substitute
be replaced
because
and absolutely, I think the injury piece is up for abuse, isn't it? We've all seen someone chase the ball out to cover and slide and try and pull a hamstring.
Can happen.
Let's move on and talk then about the fourth test, which is coming up, as we said, thick and fast on the heels of this game. So, looking like it's going to be a more spin-friendly deck is the initial chat.
Yeah.
I think Ben Stokes has said something like, "I've never seen a wicket like this. There's lots of plates on it. That they're firing a bit of water on it, which might make it dry out quickly," which seems counterintuitive, but look, he knows more than me about Test cricket pitches.
I also saw, to counter that, some chat around some of the other tests that have been played here, and they've actually...
It's held together all right.
It's held to... there's been similar thoughts. Even in this test, the third test, I was listening to quite a bit of it on the radio, and the radio commentators were going... One of the... I forget who the commentator was, but he was an Indian commentator, and he said... this was on day one, and he said, day 3, this is going to be unplayable. And it just never happened. That pitch was pretty good all the way through to the end of the test. So, I mean, I think that, like we said last week, it's been great that we haven't really been talking about pitches at all in this series. It's about the good play from both sides. And, I mean, hopefully that continues. But I think what is more relevant about that discussion is what are England going to do and what are India going to do in terms of their selection, because we've seen, it sounds like England kind of named their side possibly by the time, probably they'll name it just as we finish the pod, but usually they name it around now. It sounds like Mark Wood's going to be replaced, Ollie Robinson come in just for some fresh legs, and then the decision for England is going to be around, do we play Jimmy again, or do we bring in Bashir, or do we say Joe Root's bowling so many overs at the moment that can we just pick Dan Lawrence? So, a lot to kind of consider on their point of view. And for India, it's, they've decided to rest Jasprit Bumrah. Who do they replace him with? Do they replace him with a seamer, or do they bring in Akshar?
That's a really interesting point. I read an article where it was talking about whether or not India should play 4 spinners. And I'm not sure that is the best avenue for them, because I think their side looks way more dangerous. Has the England team been named?
Yeah, you've always got to check Twitter for these things. It's
live news.
Yeah. Give us the news.
Well, no, go with your point. We'll go with India.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Look, Mukesh wasn't particularly penetrative. He wasn't particularly dangerous looking in the test that he played. However, I think he's probably the best of the seamers that haven't been picked.
They've missed Sharma.
They really have. I think there was talk of picking an alternate seamer who might show a bit more pace. Akshar, yeah, might be an option. But I just feel like 2 seamers and 3 spinners is the way forward for India, particularly if they've got Jadeja batting at 5 or 6 or whatever. I don't think I'd mess with that formula too much.
You're grinning, so something interesting's happened, Binksy. What have they done?
Give us the news.
Well, I guarantee you we wouldn't have got this right. So we'll just have a very, very quick fire. What England bowlers would you have played in this Test match?
Would I have played?
Yeah.
Well, I think based on who's available, probably I would have gone. I would have gone with Robinson and the 2 spinners that were there, Rahan, Hartley, and then I don't know. I would have kept Jimmy going, to be quite honest. I think he's been a very useful bowler for them in this series.
Baldy?
Broad Anderson and
Monty Penderson
and Monty and who's the big one? There's the bodybuilder now, Chris Tremlett. I have Chris Tremlett in there just because I know he's super fit. No, it'll be Anderson, Robinson, Hartley, Rahan Ahmed. So I'm sure we're wrong.
So England have gone in with the same top 7 as we've seen throughout the course of this series so far. So Folkes at 7, and the bowlers Hartley, Robinson,
yes,
Anderson,
yes,
Bashir.
Oh,
nice.
okay.
So yeah,
Rehan Ahmed's missed out.
so Rehan Ahmed has missed out. So they're
Bit of a
England
shame for him.
England team for the fourth test. There you go.
Interesting.
What were his figures?
I don't think it'll do him any harm to miss out and watch a game on the sidelines and see what happens. He's obviously still a pretty young player. He's had a bit of criticism as well throughout the series, but I've actually been encouraged kind of with what I've seen in terms of his long-term future for England. But yeah,
He looks as good as any of the other guys. I don't think we're looking at this going Rehan Ahmed's a step below these other two spinners.
What's the key to England turning this around though, Binksy, before we move on to different countries?
Yeah, well, look, I think the key to England turning this around, I think, is three things. So I think it would be great if they could win the toss, number one. Number two, I think it is when they are in that position of strength with the bat, and they will be at some point in a position of strength with the bat, is that they actually do, take a little bit of that Stokes and know when it's the time to soak up a little bit of pressure. And then I think by picking this side, and they've been pretty clear around the way they're going to pick their bowling attacks. They're picking their bowling attacks to take 20 wickets as quickly as possible. They've said that quite often, so they're not worried about the runs. That they want to take the wickets as quickly as possible and take everything else out of the equation. And I think what that means with the side that they've picked here is they're probably placing a bit of a premium on accuracy with these guys. Hartley, has bowled the odd drag down ball, but has actually looked pretty good as a holding or a guy that can just hit a length. Bashir, I think we saw that in the test match that he played. For a 19-year-old lad, he looked pretty accurate and got a few revs on it. And then I think if we go back to England's success in Pakistan last winter, Ollie Robinson is still averaging 21 with the ball or something like that. So fantastic career figures. And Jimmy Anderson, I think if there are any areas on that pitch that you're targeting with a little bit of movement and an uneven bounce, that's where they're going and they're saying, our seamers are probably going to do the job of being able to winkle out wickets with, those funky straight set fields with maybe not many slips in place. So those are going to be the keys, I think, for England in this game.
Are you advocating for a cordon of mid-offs rather than a cordon of slips?
What do we think it should be called?
A loveliness of mid-offs.
Loveliness of mid-offs. Yeah, it's like we were debating.
Collective noun for a group of mid-offs.
Well, it's just my theory that in our grade of cricket, Stu, that I've done some statistical analysis. I think a third grade side is always going to catch more at mid-off than they are in the slips. So you might as well have three mid-offs rather than three slips.
Feedback taken on board, I can assure you.
Yes, well, I won't be providing much on-field feedback for the rest of this.
Not for a week or two.
Yes, absolutely. Should we move on? Let's talk a little bit, of cricket, slightly closer to home. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start with the T20, or do we want to start back to the Test series?
Let's talk about Test cricket. Let's start with let's talk about the positive things first. What do you take away from this Test match, Stuart? I've got a couple of takeaways from this South Africa Test. What is your primary reaction to this Test against South Africa?
To be quite honest, my primary reaction is we made history, and I'm actually lots of people are not happy, feel that that's not a satisfying thing to do. But New Zealand have never beaten South Africa in a series. It's taken us 92 years to win, what's now called the Tangiwai Shield, which is awesome name, by the way.
Fantastic.
Commemorating that rail incident. But New Zealand, absolutely, they made parts of this test hard, the second test, but they did exactly what was asked for them. I feel like in a number of ways, apart from maybe Devon Conway, who actually got some runs last night in the T20, which is a huge plus for New Zealand. They ticked a lot of the things that they would have wanted to see from this series. Rachin got runs. We saw Will Young come off the bench and score runs. We saw Kane Williamson show just how great he is at all times. We saw a debut for Will O'Rourke. They ticked a number of things that they wanted to see. They've got maximum World Test Championship points from this series. They were able to be put under a little bit of pressure in the second test, probably for their own doing at various times, and they came through. And actually, you look at the scorecard, and they came through quite comfortably in the end. So, look, you can certainly look at the second test with a glass half empty view, but I think for what they wanted to achieve from the overall series, I think a lot of those boxes were ticked.
I think you can take a very positive glass half full approach to all of those things that you've said. I do want to unpack some of the glass half empty things because I think they're worth talking about.
Totally.
I don't think they're necessarily the points of focus that people should be dwelling on, because New Zealand have done all the things that you've said. They've made history, they've overcome adversity, they have triumphed over a side that gave us a great deal of fighting spirit. Ultimately, maybe not as much test match world class cattle.
And 100% I acknowledge that. Like, this was a series we had to win.
However, New Zealand were on a hiding to nothing. If they didn't win both test matches like they did the first one, people would be saying that New Zealand have underperformed.
Yeah.
If they have a close test match, New Zealand have underperformed. If they win it, it was a farce, and New Zealand was always going to do that anyway. So very, very difficult for New Zealand to win over fans from that perspective. There are a lot of things to like. Should we talk about all of those? Have you got all the positives out of the way? Because I have a few others that I want to.
Let's go through the worries, and then let's finish with the positives.
Okay, we're going to do the poo sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of poo sandwich items that I think we need to talk about. I think we need to talk about the opening partnership.
Yep.
Because for a couple of years now, that opening partnership has been, and please don't use this the wrong way, their averages, both of them, have been below what I think many people expect from them and maybe what they expect from themselves. I think I read a stat somewhere that over the last couple of years, Latham's averaged in the low 30s, might even be lower than that. And, we've talked on this podcast about Conway's struggles.
Conway's has really only been the last 6 months or so. Since he scored 150 against England in the ODI World Cup, and then until that score last night for New Zealand in the T20, he'd had 20 odd innings, without a 50.
So the opening partnership as a combination hasn't been the strong suit for New Zealand that it was maybe the season or two before. That's still a concern, I think. I don't think it requires a change of cattle, but I think it's still a concern.
Yeah, I don't think there's a change of cattle, because I don't think there is anyone better to probably put at the top of the order. I know I'm going to get the Will Young comment, but I don't.
A lot of people are talking about, should Rachin go up there and should Conway go down to 4? Like, I think there are a lot of permutations where they could change things up if they wanted to, and even could be Will Young and Rachin Ravindra. Like, there are things that they could do, but
but I think most of those guys are in the side. I don't think as much stock as the podcast might have. I hope it's not in our joint names, that Will Young stock. Ultimately, he's got a reasonable, sample size, 15 or 14 or 15 test matches, and he's averaging under 30. So as much as, I know you guys like him, I don't think he's going to make it. I think Conway is going to come good. I think he proved against a pretty decent Australian attack last night that he's still got the goods. The Latham is probably the bigger worry for me. He's 70 or 80 test matches into his career. What's his, improvement ceiling now? And then who is next? And really, how long can Kane continue to go on for? And I'm sure we'll talk about him, but what an absolute freak of a bloke. So for me, that is a concern, that unless Conway starts to fire quickly, and then we get a scenario where maybe Latham does a little bit of an Usman Khawaja and starts to come
that's
good.
That's the best case scenario, right? Is that he has a late career
If he turns into late career Usman Khawaja, then yes, we'll be very happy.
Here's my view on why they shouldn't change their personnel, right? Who are they going to change it for? Will Young, who's probably not going to give them much different to what they've got now. Like, he's not a substantial upgrade on Conway or Latham. You can argue, you can make that point. Rachin might be, but where's Rachin's spot probably likely to be long term? It's probably Kane's spot at 3, right? So
maybe.
why?
I actually think his long term future is opening, but I'm very, very comfortable giving him that time to get up there. I have no problem with that.
I think it's either opening or at 3. Either way. Are we going to change him now for the sake of a few test matches, or are we going to leave him at 4? Know that position is his now, right? That is his spot at 4. we have Daryl Mitchell to come in at 5.
Yep.
And then we've got the conversation that I think we want to get onto next is what is New Zealand doing with 6 and 7 at the moment? Because that to me is still an unanswered question. Not sure that it's necessarily a problem for New Zealand, but, we've tried Santner, we've tried Glenn Phillips in this series.
Blundell's had a few lean games.
Yeah, Blundell has had a couple of lean games with the stick, but he's still a reasonable gloveman. What do we think is the thought process around 6 and 7 for New Zealand going forward?
Well, before I answer that, I actually think that all your points 100% agree in terms of I think this is a pretty big 6 to 12 months for someone like Tom Latham in particular. There's been a lot, he at one point was in the every year there was conversations about who are the best openers in the world, and Tom Latham was always sort of in that conversation.
Absolutely,
he was someone that people, maybe they never thought he was the best opener in the world, but he was always someone that kind of got honourable mentions in that category. I don't think he's there now. And I think if you look towards, the thing that everyone points to is you look at his stats against the higher ranked nations and they're not there. Like this is a series now where he's going to be going against Australia in home conditions and, people are going to be looking. This is when you can turn that narrative around, right? Yep. And it's going to be the same for some of those other guys. It's going to be the same for someone like Tom Blundell, who actually, he scored a great 100 against Australia last time we were over there at the MCG. So,
he did, yes.
He's had moments where he's sort of stepped up in those scenarios. But I think for Latham in particular, it's kind of, it seems a bit weird to say, but like legacy building, what are we going to remember from Tom Latham's career? Was he sort of just I think he'll go down probably as New Zealand's best ever opener, even if he kind of just sort of his career peters away from this point, because, you look back through our history, there's not a huge, statistically, in terms of the guys that we've had, in terms of longevity, that, there's some other players that we could talk about for a long time that, in our history that played far fewer tests. But he's got the numbers on most of those guys. But now it's time for him to show, how much longer does he have?
Yeah, if he deserves that moniker, he will have to perform well against Australia in home conditions. He's performed well in seasons past in home conditions. He's got a double 100 here in New Zealand. He's played very well. I think you're right in that there is a lot riding on this for Latham and Conway against Australia. In fact, if New Zealand are going to win either of these tests and or the series, those two are going to have to really outpoint Stark Cummins Hazelwood in New Zealand conditions and show the Australian openers, who will be a new opening pairing, how that's going to really, really go, right?
Yeah.
I think...
you can't have Kane coming in at 5 for 1 every game. He needs to... Yeah. He needs someone else to step up and help him out.
I think it's unfair to ask Kane to score the runs in every innings. You have a look at this Test series against South Africa. The only innings that New Zealand struggled with is the only one that Kane didn't get 100.
Yeah,
he got 100 in every other innings, and New Zealand looked fine. So whenever Kane gets 100, everything's dunky hoary. But as soon as he gets out for anything under 3 figures, questions start being asked of the rest of that batting lineup. So I think that's an area where everyone else is going to have to step up, because Kane's not going to be able to, well, hopefully from an Australian perspective, score all the runs for New Zealand.
Yeah, and look, I guess that plays in a little bit to that point around that 5-6, that real engine room. You've not got a lot from that engine room in this, series. Really have missed Daryl Mitchell, I think.
Yep, big time.
Absolutely.
Yep, second test for sure, missed him. Missed him in terms of, I think you could see it in that chase the most, when actually, on paper it looks very good and Will Young comes in and scores 60 odd. But I think you could see it in the way that everyone that batted with Kane batted really slow and was really sort of fighting. Whereas when you have Daryl Mitchell, I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but I will continue it through his career. He comes in and he puts the emphasis on, he changes the energy of the game as soon as he walks to the crease.
Yeah. It was very much an old-fashioned chase, wasn't it?
Yep.
Plodding along at 3 and over or thereabouts.
Yeah. It was the anti-Bazball chase for sure, but I know you didn't mean it like that.
No, I didn't. I just mean it in the way that if you've got a Daryl Mitchell, if you've got a David Warner, if you've got a Mitchell Marsh, or whoever it is who just comes in and goes, you know what, I am going to come and exert my authority. And as much as Kane exerts his authority, he doesn't do it in that that sort of dominating barrel-chested way that is part of that, that modern game. I think it's got to be that you get a little bit of that from Glenn Phillips, or you get a little bit of that from, Daryl Mitchell when he's in the side. But when you kind of look at, Williamson, Ravindra, Young, you're not super scared of that. You're scared of death by 1,000 paper cuts from someone like Williamson, but you probably know that those guys aren't going to take the game away from you in that engine room, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think that they'll still stick with Glenn Phillips for at 6. I mean, we're 2 tests away from him like being the star in Bangladesh.
Yeah,
so
he was brilliant.
I agree. And
completely brilliant in Bangladesh.
To be fair to him in this series, he turned the game with some of his catches.
Yep.
Wasn't so great last night in the T20, but his ability to, take those catches in the field and add an option with the ball. I mean, I don't know how much he's going to bowl against Australia, to be fair, in a test match, but, I think that the ability for him to, if we're in a good position, if Kane's batting well, if someone from the top order is batting well, and we can bring in a Daryl Mitchell, bring in a Glenn Phillips, maybe, it's Blundell, then it's, depending on the pitches, whether it's Mitchell Santner that also plays, suddenly we've got these guys that can play with some tempo and actually take it to the Australians. And I think at times we will have to do that in this series. We're not going to be able to just grind Australia into the ground.
I completely agree. We'll get onto it when we preview the Australia series, but I think New Zealand have to take the attack to Australia. And I think I would have, if I was New Zealand, I would have Glenn Phillips up the order at 6 ahead of Blundell, so that he has the maximum opportunity to attack with other batters around him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to over-attack when he's batting with the tail. Not that, Henry, Wagner, Jamieson's not going to play, but Henry and Wagner, certainly those guys can bat. But I would want to have him batting around other batters and certainly not going, well, shit, if there's a wicket lost here, then I'm with the tail. Now I've got to go now. So I think that's the change that hopefully New Zealand don't make, putting my one-eyed Australian hat on for the Australian series. But I think it would lead to better outcomes for New Zealand in that batting lineup.
What about the bowling, Stu? Anything you want to dwell upon there for too long?
Well, I mean, the thing that came out of this test was Will O'Rourke's debut. Record on debut for New Zealand, got 9 for 93 as a match return, and that's obviously a great return. But I think the exciting thing for me in terms of what he actually did was actually just all of the little intangibles. Like, he kept his pace going throughout the whole game. So, you can often see someone comes in, they have a big first spell, and then late in the day they come back
and they bowl 125
and they don't have that pace. He kept his pace up throughout all the spells. He was, thanks to a brilliant catch from Glenn Phillips, but actually in that third innings when South Africa was, they got themselves into a brilliant position, South Africa, with Peterson and Bedingham were, putting some real pressure on New Zealand. Will O'Rourke's the one who comes in and makes the breakthrough. And then, he goes on, takes 5 for, and he was able to just, he seems like he's someone who fits at that level. He's a tall guy, he bounce, and New Zealand don't have a lot of pace in our test attack. We're all sort of around the, I think you saw it.
130, 135.
Yeah, I mean, Henry's kind of the quickest and he's not express. So I think having that option to have another guy who can run in and kind of hit the deck hard is pretty valuable. So, yeah, again, we'll probably talk about it more in depth when we actually look ahead to that series in more detail. But I think he's a serious chance. I mean, particularly with Jamieson now out of the series. And I mean, just to briefly talk about that, I mean, just gutting for him, really. Like, to have another stress fracture after spending, a year out of the game, really, and starting to look like himself again these past few games, to have to go and do all of that again is really, really difficult. And he talked about, it's almost the mental side. We talked about the mental side being the toughest part of it when you go through something like that.
I think he's got to sit and have a beer with Pat Cummins when the Australians are over here, because Pat Cummins went through that for 5-6 years when he was a young fella from the sort of age of 17 through 24. So if there's anyone that can lend some perspective to A, how hard it is, and B, that it's possible to come back and, prove the old adage that you're injury prone until you're not, I think, that would be the guy that I'd be tapping on the shoulder and going, actually, mate, do you mind just having a couple of spates and answering a few trivia questions and talking about what the process is and what it's like?
I guess it will depend from Cummins whether or not it's an ethical product, isn't it?
Yeah, it would have to be. It would have to be. It'd have to be environmentally friendly and all that sort of stuff. Any comments on the South Africa team before we wrap up? Sorry, you want to talk about
we're not going to get out of this without talking about Kane, but we can talk about South Africa and finish with Kane if you'd like.
Just let him talk about Kane.
No,
let's talk about Kane and then let's come on and talk about South Africa.
Yeah,
right. I'm going to get a cup of tea.
No, well, honestly, like I guess the thing about Kane, everyone knows how good he is. Although you still see the doubters. You still see the doubters saying that he's not as good as Coley and he's not as good as Root and he's not as good as all these other people in terms of those conversations, which is fine. I guess the thing that I'm quite fascinated in and has come out of this test, I mean, like you putting that innings aside that he played to win that game, when he was at the crease, you knew New Zealand were going to win. It was sort of that simple. While he was there, he had everything under control, like he usually does when he's at his best. He's someone who's, you can rattle off the things that he's done. He scored 700s from his last 12 innings. And, there's a serious knee injury in the middle of all of that. He's got the most fourth innings hundreds ever now, 5 alongside Yunus Khan, 4 of them in successful run chases, which personally I rank very, very highly. His second highest average of all time in test wins of 81, only behind, you guessed it, Sir Donald Bradman at 130, which is quite remarkable. Since the start of 2014, he's averaging 65 with from 69 tests, 2,800s in that span. We can keep rattling off, fewest innings to 3,200s. I guess the interesting part that kind of came out of this test was where does he rank in terms of New Zealand all time? Because it's so tricky to kind of compare Richard Hadlee, who was a brilliant cricketer and an all-rounder. I mean, an all-rounder, but I think, predominantly made his hay, with the ball and played in a different kind of lineup and a different sort of success. We had no success when Richard Hadlee was here. Richard Hadlee turned up, or before Richard Hadlee turned up, and New Zealand started to win some tests. Kane Williamson's career, whether, you think it's a coincidence or a decent chunk of it Kane can get credit for, his career has been through New Zealand's best decade of, international cricket, I would say, throughout our history. So, they've both kind of got that winning on the side. And I just don't know. And, maybe Baldy can help from the historical side of things. How do we compare the two of them in terms of, at what point do we say Kane Williamson is New Zealand's best cricketer ever?
No.
Now?
Well, best cricketer ever.
When does he surpass Hadlee, I guess, is the question.
He's definitely the best batter. There's no question about that.
People might point to Crow, but I think, just statistically, Kane is just so far ahead of Crow now that I don't think you can make that argument.
Yeah. I've kind of flippantly said he's not as good as Coley. I think the stats would prove you wrong. Would tell you a different story. So, yeah, look, he's definitely up there. And I think probably it's a really difficult one because there's a lot of stories about Hadlee that, he wasn't the kind of consummate team man. It was very much about, if I do my job, then we're a great team. Whereas Kane has got a completely different mentality. He wants other people to shine. I think the fact that he's a genuine 3 format player still, and every time you try and question, we should probably give up one of the formats. He does something special in that format to go, well, actually, no, he's got a lot to offer. Yeah. I think about, recent T20 World Cups, for example. So I absolutely think he's probably got to go down as very, very close to your greatest player, and certainly by the time he finishes, he will be.
What about from your algorithm?
Baldy's got some real stats here.
Well, I just want to throw some comps out there. So I'm not saying that this is right, but where we had Hadlee in the top order Hall of Fame was around about the same kind of area that we had Cook, that we had Dravid, and that we had Ponting. Those are the kind of batters who were above and below him. So, Ponting 168 tests, 13,000 runs at 51. Cook was 12,000 runs at 45, and Dravid was 13,000 runs at 52. So if Kane's average is around 51, 52, and he won't have
55.
he won't have that many tests, right? He won't have how many tests he played now? 85,
98.
Okay, so he's going
100 at Hagley, hopefully.
Okay, so he's going to end up with 125 tests, 130 tests, maybe. So he's not going to play as many test matches as those guys. But if he ends up with, I don't know,
10,000 runs.
10,000 runs. So 10,000 runs at 52 is Yunus Khan. And I think he would probably end up going past Yunus Khan on the top order Hall of Fame. And he's at sort of in the low 30s, high 20s.
He's quite statistically similar to Yunus Khan in terms of like conversion rates. And a lot of the things that people point to about Kane actually kind of match up with Yunus Khan. So it's an interesting...
So here's another one. Sunil Gavaskar, 125 tests, 10,000 runs at 51, 3,400s.
And he's already a better commentator than him, and he's never commentated.
So post-play career aside, I think floor, Gavaskar, Yunus Khan, potential high-siders somewhere around Dravid, Cook, Hadley, somewhere like that. And I think if you put him in that conversation, you look at him head-to-head against Hadley, I think that now it's a conversation. At the end of his career, if he does have 10,000 runs, if he does have an average of, 53, and he's got, he might not have 40 hundreds. He might.
He's getting it pretty quickly at the moment.
He might. But remember, he did have a patch there where he went a year and a half without getting one.
Jeez, a year and a half without 100.
But
I think he's got 100 in every single calendar year.
He does. That year and a half was kind of
So I know we did this a while ago, Bordy, but he covers Alistair Cook. He already covers Alistair Cook.
Wow.
He already covers Raul Dravid for me.
Wow, okay.
So...
Yep. You brook no argument from me there, but remember the longevity conversation.
Yeah, and Cook, I think
he's not getting past that Anderson fella though.
I think the interesting part is a lot of these guys we do see. He hasn't got to a lot of these guys get like the last 2 or 3 years. Everything goes down, right? Their average goes down, and some of that it tends to bring them back to the pack.
That happened to Ponting, right?
Happened to Ponting. It's maybe happening to Smith. Hopefully, continues to happen in this series. But you're the one that keeps saying it, Baldy. That you think Smith's average will come down. I mean, if it doesn't, and he keeps going at this rate, then
it would be unprecedented.
Well, as he said himself, I'm averaging 80 as an opener.
Well, yeah. Maybe.
Wow.
Yeah. There you have it.
Anything else we want to talk on this test match?
Look, you asked me about the South Africans before. I think the key thing that stands out there. I mean, awesome story for Dane Piedt, who came back and bowled beautifully well. I think actually they kind of missed a trick. South Africa not bowling him straight after I think it was on that in that final day when New Zealand were going for the chase. He'd bowled really, really well throughout that test, and I think probably had Nathan Lyon kind of licking his lips when in terms of the way that New Zealand played off spin. But cool story for someone to have pretty much given up on playing international cricket again. Gets a text from Shukri Conrad, New Zealand ? Pretty much in the same way that Moeen Ali got. So yeah. Very, very cool story. And I think the other thing is Bedingham, right? Bedingham I think he'd already shown in that series against India that he was someone that, is up to test standard. But he sort of, awesome for him that he said, no, I'm not going to take the T20 contract because, he's not contracted by South Africa Cricket. So he was able to kind of make that decision on his own. And I think you see him play, he clearly could have got a contract. He's good enough to have, his game translates to T20 cricket as well. But he said, no, I want to show that I'm a test cricketer. And he did that in absolute spades. And his 100... he put South Africa into a winning position in that game and could have, he continues there for probably another half an hour and New Zealand's in some serious trouble.
Yeah, he's the key takeaway from this series from a South African point of view. He's the guy that when all their other stars come back and, all of the, firmament aligns, he will be the guy who should be in the selectors conversation still going forward.
Yeah.
Class cricketer.
Right. Should we finish off with a little bit of New Zealand-Australia T20? Twitter still carrying on with this. Michael Atherton reckons these are good changes for England, by the way. So I'll go
very good.
Whatever he says goes as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. So First T20, so Australia landing on these shores. The David Warner farewell tour. He got a warm reception down at the basin.
Oh, kind to him when he left the field too.
Yeah, absolutely. But cracking game of cricket for the neutral. What about for the non-neutrals, Baldy? Do you want to go bragging rights?
No bragging rights. I think there are some things Australia need to pay attention to in the build-up to this World Cup. We've got 2 more T20s, both of them in Auckland, which in and of itself probably need to be taken with a grain of salt just because of the nature of the ground. For those who haven't been to Eden Park is the world's shortest ground straight of the wicket, and it's effectively played on a rugby field, right? With a couple of little bits and pieces tucked in and around the corners. I don't know if we're going to learn a lot, particularly about Zampa in the Eden Park game, but
do we need to learn much about Zampa? He's been pretty influential in the last 2 ODI limited overs World Cups.
He has been. However, he was pumped last night and he was pumped in the West Indies series. Australia have relied on him a lot, and we see now that when he is not on song, Australia get hammered.
Hurt, yeah. He's a key cog in their
He
attack,
is absolutely a key cog, and if sides can take him down on a regular basis, and New Zealand took him down last night superbly, I thought, particularly Rachin. Rachin got
power that Rachin showed yesterday.
To be fair, all the spinners got pumped last night.
Yeah, in fairness, they all did, but I think it's something that Australia need to pay some attention to, and it might have actually implications for how we select whether or not we take a second spinner to the World Cup. And
I think you will in the West Indies.
There'll
be different.
I think we will.
Totally different pitches to what we've seen here.
Which might mean Agar might get a go. We'll cover this later, but it's something for Australia to ponder on. The concern for me is that we've conceded 200 plus in the last 4 T20 internationals that we've played. Now that's 3 against the West Indies, which we won 2 of, and this one. So we've won 3 out of 4. But I don't think Australia want to be chasing 200 on a regular basis, even in the West Indies where grounds are smaller and the wickets are good and you can score lots of runs. So that is a concern for me. But we were saved by the fact that Tim David had been pillaging the Monopoly board community chess cards and getting all the get out of jail frees. And he's been spending
him getting out of jail free. He like the balls that he hit yesterday. One aside that Tim Southee bowled a knee high full toss on leg stump that he flicked for 6 quite easily. The 2 balls that he hit from Milne, yes, Milne missed, but Milne missed fractionally, and Tim David went back in his crease. Milne probably just about hit the Yorker line, the Yorker length, but David's gone back in his crease, absolutely pumped both of those for 6. And then the boundary, the boundary at the end, Southee's pretty much probably hit that or bowled that where he wanted to bowl it.
He batted very well.
And he smashed it. So, yeah.
He actually, awesome. I was being a little bit facetious in terms of he's been using all those get out of jail free cards to get us home in some of these matches, but he's a key cog for Australia in that World Cup. He's one of our leading run scorers over the last little while we figure out who the best people are at the top of the order. He is actually solving a huge problem for us at 6 or 7. If we can bat him in both positions, that would be brilliant. But 6 and/or 7 is great while we figure the rest of it out, because the rest of it is permutations. It's Marsh, Warner, Head, Short, Smith, Maxwell, Inglis, Wade. All of those guys will shuffle in somewhere. Stoinis will probably shuffle in somewhere, but he's the guy that really now Australia is not batting around, but we know what we're going to get in that finishing spot, and the rest of it's just figuring out the remainder.
Ironically, going into those last 3 overs, but Mitch Marsh missed a couple, didn't he? And I think it would have
missed one.
Would have actually maybe been a bit more comfortable. But he'd gone really well up until that that point. But that was some clean,
it was a great hitting. I obviously hated the ending, but it was a great game of cricket. And I think from a New Zealand point of view, it'd be great to go to these games. I'm going to these next 2 games. It'd be great to go to them and see Ripper games again. But I think for us, it's more about, I actually think it's more about the individual performances that we're going to see, because getting Devon Conway to score some runs yesterday was absolutely crucial. It wasn't a vintage 60, even though it came off, still at a pretty good strike rate. And he was really, important to keeping that strike rate. They kind of kept it 10 and over almost the whole innings, and then him and Rachin had a little spell that kind of took it over that mark. And, but getting him to a score was crucial. And there were signs, he had to cut back-to-back pulls off Pat Cummins at times. I think that, the inside edge thing is always going to be a thing with Devon Conway. It was a thing when he was unstoppable, but, now he's been sort of getting out that way a little bit more. It's been a problem, but, I think just encouraging to see him score some runs, encouraging to see Lockie Ferguson bowl a really well. Brilliant spell. I don't know why he bowled a short ball in that second to last ball or third to last ball that he bowled that got deposited for 6, but every other ball he bowled, I think, was brilliant. He was hitting his Yorkers, he was moving the ball around. So
with pace, genuine pace.
That was really encouraging. I think probably the person who's under the most the people who are under the most pressure in these next couple of games are probably Mark Chapman and Ish Sodhi. I think Sodhi's been getting hit for a while now in some of these limited overs games, and it's a bit of a concern. I actually thought he bounced back quite well.
It doesn't help that he has to play at home.
No, on these tiny grounds. So I think he'll probably still be on the plane to the West Indies, but
I think he has to be.
It'd be nice to see him get 2 for 30 in one of these games and kind of play an important role,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pleasing thing for me, it's not a surprise to us, but it might be a surprise to some, is just how much power Rachin had, and we saw him in Eden Park play a really good power innings that surprised a few. I think he made maybe it was 40 or 30 off not many balls, but that's not what he is known for, and it's really pleasing to see that aspect of his game, if he's going to bat at number 3 for New Zealand in those circumstances, really bring that to that contest. But I think the Sodhi thing just shows you how good Santner is, right, in T20s, right? The comparison of the two just shows you how good Santner is and continues to be. So there are a few things for New Zealand to work out, but this happens in T20 cricket.
There's no Williamson, there's no Mitchell.
Yep.
Finn looked really good last night. I thought,
real happy with him.
He's kind of starting to show some things and showing a bit more of that balance. But I know we're running quite late. Baldy, you did want to just mention Australian women's.
Can we just talk about the women's test match with South Africa before we go?
Annabel Sutherland, surely.
Yes, Annabel Sutherland is the headliner. Fantastic innings. I mean, Will Sutherland's played for Australia, and now Annabel Sutherland's got a double 100. Player of the match.
Did not realise they were related. Anyway,
it's brother and sister.
Awesome.
Son of James Sutherland, the CEO of Cricket Australia. So nepotism at the selection table notwithstanding, I'm not suggesting that there is.
I think she certainly showed she belonged there.
Absolutely. So Alyssa Healy also joins Mitchell Starc in the husband and wife with top score of 99 club in Test cricket. And Australia have thrashed South Africa. However, I think what's most important to take away from the last 2 series that Australia have played, when they played India and lost the test match to India, and South Africa have had landmark victories in the ODI and T20 series, is that international women's cricket is getting closer and closer and closer together. Yes, Australia are uncovering great new players to replace the likes of Meg Lanning and Rachel Haynes, who have both retired. But it is encouraging to see the gap between the Australian, unstoppable juggernaut, and I use air quotes for those listening on Spotify, and the rest of the international game, that's closing rapidly. So that's fantastic for the women's game.
I wish I could feel the same about New Zealand getting closer to them, but the White Ferns obviously haven't played for a while.
They haven't.
We'll see what happens.
And that's the other point, is that now, hopefully, this test match in particular, not that it was a particularly close game, but is a catalyst for more women's test cricket being played by more nations more often. I don't think we're going to see many 3-test series. We don't in men's cricket, so why would that change? But hopefully we see more women's test matches being played, because I think that the standard of cricket is light years ahead of where it was 20, 25 years ago, and it deserves to get billing as a format that's played on a regular basis.
Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, I just look at someone like Alyssa Healy, who's been around for a long time. Test match debut in 2011.
Yeah,
has only played 9 test matches. So, there should, I think, be. You look at the success of that women's Ashes series with the multi-format. The way that it dovetailed in with the men's series last year was fantastic.
It was awesome,
but one test match, I think you've got to see 3, even if it is just with England, India, South Africa, Australia, maybe.
Yeah, like you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to start somewhere, even if it's even if we start with 2, like we have here in New Zealand.
Well, honestly, if you start with one test being mandatory for every series, or whatever, like for a touring side, that's a huge start.
Yeah,
New Zealand,
absolutely.
most of that New Zealand side hasn't played a test.
Yeah,
they've been, someone like Sophie Devon. I don't think she's played a test.
In fact, when you look at it, that's insane. Alyssa Healy's played 107 women's ODIs and 153 women's T20s for 9 test matches.
Yeah. It's outrageous. So anyway, so congratulations to the Australians. They've continued to they put up a record score, 575 for 9 declared on the back of Healy's 99, Mooney 78, and then a bunch of 30s and 40s and 50s, and Annabel Sutherland's 210. Huge. Well done them. All that's remaining is that for Phoebe Litchfield to get a bunch of runs in Test cricket because she's a super duper star.
Yeah,
that's it. Thanks, boys. Thanks for humouring me.
Absolutely. Well, that is all we've got time for. Well, we've probably got time for much more, but we are going to stop a lazy hour and 12 minutes. So thanks for bearing with us if you've made it this far into the Top Order podcast. As we mentioned, England-India kicks off tomorrow. We've got the T20 Eden Park tomorrow night as well. Second game, third game on Sunday, although the weather forecast looks shocking for that. And then we've got some Test cricket down at the Basin and at Hagley. We'll be covering all of that on the Top Order podcast and a lot more. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us here in Auckland. We'll see you soon on the next episode. Good night.